to Couch Potato Diary. Happy Tuesday. My name is Peter Klein. Thank you very much for tuning in today. This podcast was streamed live on twitch.tv/primetimepk. You can get these live and in some cases a day early over on my Twitch account. Would appreciate a follow, would really appreciate a subscription, but I totally understand times are tough either way. Coming up on this show today, we are looking at the fantasy football waiver wire, the dumpster darlings, a massive fight in the world of boxing. Our preview of Usyk2Fury 2 continues, and WWE Raw Recap. So a lot to cover. Thank you all so much for hanging out today. All right, it is the fantasy football semi-finals, and hopefully you don't need these waiver wire pickups, but if you do, we have them for you here. These are the must-add players heading into the fantasy football semi-finals. We will start at the quarterback position. It is Bryce Young, 7% rostered. It is a good matchup against the Cardinals. After what was a tough game last week in what was supposed to be a good matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. And that was a waiver wire pickup that we suggested. So if you survived, you're probably not super stoked on going down that road again. But I do think that this is, again, a decent matchup for Bryce Young here this week in a bounce back spot after a few good games in a row and now one banana peel against the Cowboys. At the wide receiver position, we have Jalen McMillan, 9% rostered. He has 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. The Bucs offense found another level last week against the Los Angeles Chargers. That was a really impressive game from Tampa Bay, and I think McMillan has the opportunity to take advantage of that as he looks to grow now, facing a vulnerable Dallas Cowboys secondary. Also available on the waiver wire at wide receiver is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 33% rostered, so we're getting up to the point where he doesn't qualify for this list anymore. 7 targets now in back-to-back games. I think he should have a better game this week, given that I would anticipate better quarterback play with Spencer Rattler, I would assume, getting the start for the Saints on Monday Night Football against the Green Bay Packers. And so again, we've talked about the lack of weapons out in New Orleans. MVS has an opportunity to take advantage of a lot of potential volume. At running back, also with the New Orleans Saints, it's Kendre Miller, 11% rostered. Kamara banged up, and you can see now where the path to playing time is for Miller. I think he is a must-own. I don't think you need to go out and just unload all the fab you have left on Kendre Miller. Quite frankly, I don't think there is that guy this week in the 35 and under ranking that we kind of look at here, or 35% rostered and under threshold that we go by on this show. But I think just based on, again, Kamara getting banged up in that game, they may want to keep him for next year and see what you have in this young talent who kind of was buried under the last coach. So I think that there is a real opportunity for Miller to get a little bit more volume, but I think you do have to have him on your bench in case something happens to Alvin Kamara going into week 17. And basically the same situation here. Kenneth Gainwell, 5% owned in the Philadelphia Eagles backfield. I do wonder if they start to wind Barkley down a little bit. We talked last night about how Barkley started to kind of hobble off with a bit of an ankle problem. So we will see if there is an injury scare there that has them pull back on Barkley a little bit. The difference between New Orleans and Philadelphia, obviously, is that Philadelphia is battling for a first-round bye and that number 1 seed, while the New Orleans Saints are just killing time before they get to go to Cabo in a couple of weeks. At the tight end spot, again, New Orleans. This is relying way too much on Spencer Rattler, but Juwan Johnson is 13% rostered. He only gets 3 targets in the last game, but both of his receptions came when Rattler was in at quarterback. So for sure, monitor the New Orleans quarterback situation going into Monday, but I think there's going to be a little bit more volume and just a better offense in general for Johnson to take advantage of when they take on the Packers on Monday night. Also at tight end, Brenton Strange for Jacksonville, just 3% rostered. With Evan Ingram out, he had 12 targets last week. I don't think that's repeatable at all. But he's facing a Raiders team that kind of struggles, despite what you saw from Kirk Cousins there last night. And so I think that you can take advantage of this opportunity. Again, there isn't a whole lot of talent on the Jacksonville side of things. And for Mac Jones, he is a not great quarterback and a young quarterback. And young, not great quarterbacks tend to focus a lot on their tight ends. So a chance, I think, for Brenton Strange to work his way into this conversation a little bit more and a little bit more as the weeks kind of go along here. Up next, it is our defense, and we are again going with Jacksonville, 8% rostered, facing the Raiders. If you watched that game on Monday night, you either have a gambling problem or you needed something in fantasy football. But you could see that offense struggles to do anything when it comes to moving the football. And so I think Jacksonville, while not a good defense that made the Jets look good last week, I do think the Jags have a chance to take advantage of this option. And now this one, it is going to be gross. It's going to be dirty. And this is a only if you are the most desperate fantasy football owner in your semifinals. But the Giants are 3% rostered. They're facing the Atlanta Falcons. And it looked so bad against a Raider defense that didn't have Max Crosby last night. So how can we really feel comfortable with that Falcons offense? And so because of that, I think you can feel comfortable with the New York Giants defense out there, maybe taking advantage of, again, a very limited Kirk Cousins on the other side of the football. So those are some of the waiver wire pickups that I think could help you out in the semifinals this week. Yes, you have to be very desperate to have the Giants. You have to be very desperate to have anyone on the Giants aside from Malik Neighbors. But yes, no, I honestly, like, the waiver wire segment at this point almost feels just unnecessary, because if you are in the final four in any fantasy league that isn't like a 32 team league, you probably have your stuff set, right? And so this now is just trying to mitigate some of the issues that you may have, whether it's an injury, someone getting banged up, or stashing someone away to take advantage of an injury. That's basically where we are at this point. If you are still streaming defenses in week 16, bravo. But odds are you probably stumbled on one along the way that you feel comfortable with. But yeah, no, Toxic, you are absolutely right. It is the most desperate of desperate plays going with the Giants. Although, just looking at here, this has made me think of something. A little bit of daily fantasy look. Do we must have NFL games up yet. Yeah, okay, here we go. There's that. Let's go to this one, and I'll just click on that. We're not actually doing a team here. I want to see, sorry, I could have explained this better instead of just starting to look at my phone. I want to see what the Giants defense is listed as a daily fantasy defense here. So the Giants are, they are the fourth least expensive defense at 2,200. That feels like a bit of a value play. If you are really looking to save some money in daily fantasy, you can get the Giants at 2,400 and maybe take advantage again of a very limited Atlanta Falcons offense. And maybe this is overthinking things a little bit too much. That is going to do it for the Fantasy Football Waiver Wire. But for those in the chat, if you have any fantasy football questions that you may want to ask, you can definitely do that and let me know. And we'll answer those as we kind of roll along here. Let's move now to the fantasy football dumpster darlings, the best unexpected performances from the NFL's fantasy football from week whatever we just came out of, week 15. Crazy. But either way, this shows the frustrating nature of fantasy football while also highlighting some sleepers that maybe you can jump on. And look, we just talked about how gross it might feel to pick up some of these guys on the waiver wire, but sometimes those players step up in big time ways. So let's look at the fantasy football dumpster darlings. As always, we are presented by Sea of Dead. Should have mentioned that in the beginning. Sea of Dead 403.ca. We got some new merch up now. Some stuff for pre-order, and hopefully that stuff's going to get here this week. We're hoping to be able to get that all boxed up and let you guys come and pick that up here before the Christmas season winds down. So seaofdead403.ca, get some great Calgary swag. It is now time for the fantasy football dumpster darlings. We begin at the quarterback position. So again, for those of you who are unfamiliar, it is the best performances from the least owned players. We put them together on a team and see how that team would have done. Cooper Rush, 8% owned, which is entirely too high, but 21.6 fantasy, 0.06 fantasy points. At the wide receiver spot, it is Rashad Bateman coming out of hibernation for a 21.5 point performance this week. Our wide receiver 2 is Jalen Coker, who apparently plays for the Carolina Panthers. He's 2% rostered, came up with 19 fantasy points, even with Bryce Young stinking up the joint last week. At running back, it is Amir Abdullah, still in the league. Kind of. He plays for the Raiders. He is 16% rostered, came up with 16 fantasy points. Justice Hill is probably the most frequent player on this list. Every now and then, he just reminds you like, hey, by the way, I'm a really dynamic pass-catching running back. He's owned in 17% of leagues and picked up 15.3 fantasy points. At tight end, it's Brenton Strange, 2% rostered, 12.8 fantasy points, and our flex spot is Jalen McMillan, 8% rostered, 16 fantasy points. At the kicker spot, it is Will Richard, kicker for the Vikings, 9% rostered, 15 fantasy points. And the defense, they stepped up on Thursday night, making it just an ugly game. It's the Rams defense, 11% rostered against San Francisco, 12 fantasy points. This team, where Rashad Bateman is easily the highest owned player on the team, comes up with 148.76 fantasy points. Gross. We move on from fantasy football to the world of boxing, as once again, it is an epic rematch to close out the 2024 calendar in the world of boxing, as Oleksandr Usyk defends all of his heavyweight championships against the guy who he took a bunch of them from in Tyson Fury. Yesterday, we looked at what is on the line for Usyk, aside from his heavyweight championship. A little bit more at stake for the challenger this weekend in the bigger picture. Obviously looking to get his belts back, but also looking to get a little bit of that legacy back as well. Let's take a look at it as we continue to preview Fury versus Usyk. It is a fantastic rematch coming up this weekend in Saudi Arabia as Oleksandr Usyk defends his heavyweight championship against Tyson Fury in an epic rematch from the bout that these two had, unifying the heavyweight championship belts back in May. Once again, this is not for the undisputed heavyweight championship because the IBF sucks and took the belt away from Usyk. But still, a bunch of them are on the line when these two step into the ring. As mentioned yesterday, we talked about Usyk. Today, we are looking at what is on the line for the former heavyweight champion of the world and the current challenger, Tyson Fury, in this rematch with Oleksandr Usyk. Fury, legacy-wise first, he has obviously established himself as the heavyweight of this generation, right? He beats Klitschko, he beats Wilder twice. That's like, he kind of wins this era. And we talked a bit about it yesterday. Usyk just feels like a late addition to this, so it feels almost like a different era, right? Because Wilder is done. Joshua, he did get to fight him, and he did beat him twice. So I guess like he is still fighting these two guys in this generation, but it still does feel like this is just not necessarily the same era. He wasn't in it the whole way as Fury was. He was just off being awesome at cruiserweight. But to really cap off this run here for Tyson Fury, it sure would be a big feather in the cap to knock off the present day pound for pound great that is Oleksandr Usyk. I don't think a loss changes too much of the feel of his career, right? Like we already had the go last time when he loses to Usyk. And so I think that the loss in the last fight probably does more damage to the reputation than a loss in this one would. It would just be a heavyweight at the end of his career, ended up losing to a very talented fighter who happens to be older, but still, this is just how these things go sometimes. And so I don't think the overall perception of the career of Tyson Fury would be all that different if he were to lose this fight. A win, though, And I do think it does help out a little bit more of the all-time status. I don't think he's ever going to get into that real pantheon of the all-time great heavyweight boxers, right? But I do think that he is able to kind of get back on track at getting close there if you can just pass off the Usyk loss as, yeah, you know what? Really good fighter. Maybe I took him lightly. I've come back now and I've beat him in this fight. So now I am the champ one more time. And I have avenged that loss and not taken it off the record necessarily, but being able to avenge that and just have that win, I think does kind of help round out the resume for him when you are looking at kind of all-time great status in the heavyweight division. So again, I don't think a loss really damages him. A win, and it does kind of get him back into the conversation to not necessarily be at the adults table, but to be kind of waiting in line for that, I suppose. In terms of the here and now, it is a bit more of a desperate situation for Fury. I think he desperately needs a win. A loss here, and he is out of the real heavyweight championship picture. He would have to have Usyk lose to get back into it. And at 36, I don't think he has the time to be waiting around here. And so at this point for me, if he were to lose this bout, I think you just do a fight with Anthony Joshua, just again to kind of round out the era. Even though it is entirely like a decade too late, it is still a fight I think that you kind of roll with and to just kind of, get another big payday and roll on with that and just kind of put a bow on this era of heavyweight boxing. A win gets him most of his gold back, and it likely sets up a trilogy fight that, again, is a monster payday and one of the biggest fights that you could make in a really, really long time. And I think, again, there, if you can win a rivalry against a guy who beat you and was a pound-for-pound great at the time, that, again, starts to bolster that all-time legacy that you start to look at with Tyson Fury in this newer era of heavyweight boxing. So, in the here and now, there is so much on the line for Tyson Fury. A win, and you are back to being the heavyweight champion. You are back to being in those pound-for-pound rankings and all of that. A loss, and it kind of feels like it's done. Not in terms of being a moneymaker, because I think he can do that for as long as he wants to, but in terms of being relevant in the heavyweight title picture, I just feel like it would be a step too far for him to lose this fight and to stay in that title hunt. So, how does he do it? If Usyk is going to start slow again, Fury has to take advantage of this. The one thing he didn't do in the last fight that I think is going to be a real significant step in this one is work the body. I think that in the last fight, he didn't really take advantage of when things were going his way. If you can work the body and kind of wear down Usyk a little bit more, then you start to counterbalance that cardio edge that Usyk is going to probably have in the latter stages of this fight. It is one thing to just not be carrying around that much weight and be able to kind of hang with Tyson Fury and then be able to take advantage. But if you have these big shots that are just knocking the wind out of you, that can start to bring the video game stamina meter down just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And that is where Fury, I think, can be able to hang in the later rounds a little bit more. And they talked after the last fight, they talked about how, no, look, we were happy with the game plan. I thought we worked the body perfectly. We threw a lot of body shots. And that's just, it's not true. And so it's weird that they went out and said that they used the proper game plan when they actually didn't implement it at all. So that tells me that they are aware that that game plan needs to be used a little bit more. The one thing we talked about yesterday on the Usyk side is that Usyk is going to be a little bit more familiar now with that reach advantage that Tyson Fury has and be able to figure out how to get inside maybe a little bit quicker this time. So there needs to be an adjustment on Tyson Fury's end, and I do think making Usyk pay when he comes inside by ripping to the body is going to be a very good way to start this one. There was a lot going on in Fury's life at the time of the last fight, and I'm not making excuses. I've said before, I think Usyk is the guy in this division. I think he's the most talented heavyweight that we have right now when it comes to boxing skill, with Fury being a very close second. So if Fury was taking Usyk lightly in the first fight, he needs to show that he learned his lesson and be able to put it on Usyk in this bout. And any discussion going into anything about Tyson Fury, is always going to have a complicated layer to it. Like this fight, I've said, and we're doing a bunch of preview stuff on it, I am so excited for this fight coming up this weekend. I think from a pure analyzing the boxing fight, this is one of the more exciting fights you can make right now in the sport, and I am so excited to watch these guys step into the ring on Saturday afternoon. And when you just look at the boxing element of it with Tyson Fury, it is one of the stories that make people fall in love with this sport, where you have a guy who upsets this dominant champion, ushers in a new era, and at the exact same time starts battling crippling depression, balloons up to 400 pounds, and basically feels like he's going to die any day. He is able to get that back on track, come back into a reinvigorated heavyweight division, continue to dominate, and pick up big win after big win against marquee fighter after marquee fighter, while also dealing with a lot of personal tragedy as that goes along. It is truly an inspiring story. On the other hand, he has said some absolutely deplorable things about the LGBTQIA2S plus communities, and just feels like has a lot of problematic views on a lot of things that alienate a lot of people. And so that is always something that kind of hangs over it. And then you add that to the already difficult situation to stomach with Saudi Arabia having such a major role in this fight, as they do in so many of them, and the awful human rights violations that are going on in that part of the world as well. And it just makes for a real difficult weekend for boxing fans to stomach. And it makes it difficult to just enjoy the fights this weekend. Just felt like that needed to be said. I felt like I was almost glossing over it a bit too much given everything going on. So felt we need to put that out there. All that being said, again, from a boxing standpoint, still going to be analyzing this fight, still going to be breaking it down. Full fight preview coming up this weekend. And again, for those watching live a little bit later on in the stream, for those watching delayed, whether it be on YouTube, Daily Motion, or listening in podcast form, we are going to be putting the look at the boxing schedule coming up tomorrow. So again, for those watching live, that's going to be happening a little bit later on here in the stream. Let's move into the world where Tyson Fury has been a time or two. The WWE, as Monday Night Raw, recapping things from Saturday night's main event from Boston, Massachusetts. Let's talk about it. So, the WWE looking to follow up on what was a really fun Saturday night's main event with Monday Night Raw from Boston, Massachusetts. And we begin the show with CM Punk and Seth Rollins in a bit of a promo battle. Punk starting things off with a few good notes. Rollins coming in through the crowd. I thought Punk then saying, "You're finally in the spot where you're supposed to be," among the other CM Punk fans. I thought that was a really good chirp. I thought that was a really good one. The one thing that kind of takes away from this is the crowd isn't sure who to get behind. Because you got Punk coming out and it's the music and he's still CM Punk and he's got all these amazing lines and all this stuff and it's a very easily chantable name and you get really excited when CM Punk comes out. But then it seemed like the crowd kind of turned when CM Punk starts to mention, "Oh, and you got that stupid song." And the crowd starts singing the song and they're like, "Oh wait, we like this song and we like singing this song, but we also like you." And so we are conflicted now. And it seems like that's where they kind of lost them, where everyone in the crowd kind of realized at one point, like, hey, we like both these guys, and we like singing that song. So this is a little bit awkward for us. I think overall, the match is going to be incredible. And the feud in here is good for the next one up here for CM Punk. It looked like they were trying to maybe tease a bit of a heel thing with Drew McIntyre, but then Rollins telling him basically to kick rocks, and they have a pull apart a little bit later on. So they have really intertwined a lot of pieces here coming off of this kind of bloodline adjacent storyline. Intercontinental title match, Bronn Brekker taking on Ludwig Kaiser. The crowd loved Bronn Brekker. Like, this guy, he feels like a main eventer. And, excuse me, we have had a lot of the build for this year be around, like, building up Gunther And I would say building up LA Knight a little bit as well. I think next year's project to get into the world title picture is going to be Bronn Brekker. But again, I've said this a number of times. The mid card on Monday Night Raw right now is just fantastic. And I think you got another example of it here. This was a fun match. You got a fun spot with Braun clotheslining Kaiser over the table. That sends us to break. When we come back, Kaiser is looking for that drop kick into the stairs, into the leg or whatever of Bronn Brekker. And the camera is solely focused on Kaiser as he's ripping around. And then the camera goes behind him and you see Braun's not there. And there's a bit of a where'd he go, what happened? And then Braun comes back around behind him with a big shoulder tackle. I thought that was a really, really fun spot as well. At the end, Bronn Brekker does get the victory. And both these guys once again deliver a performance that we have seen from both of them before that has been quite fun to see. Up next, we had a recap of the Cody angle that happened after they went off the air with the Kevin Owens thing. And so, first of all, in the Saturday Night's Main Event recap that I posted, I didn't cover that because I honestly, I didn't see it. I was avoiding all spoilers from Saturday Night's Main Event, so any kind of post-fight whatever, I missed it. And then I was watching a replay, and as soon as it was done, I was basically on streaming. So I was like, oh shit, Kate, gotta go. So entirely missed it. So that's my bad. But it felt a little bit weird because they show the attack from Kevin Owens on Cody. And then after it is done, and you have Cody being motionless, being laid onto a stretcher and carried out. And then it comes back around and presented by Chime, which is something. Joe Tessitore, well, 45 million views of this on social media. And they tried to kind of twist it because I think they realized too how fucking insane that is. Like, oh, hey, our poster child here just might have been paralyzed. We're not sure. Probably not. But he had to be carried out on a stretcher on Saturday night. But holy shit, a lot of people watched it. They kind of realized that all at the same time. And, most of this people pouring in their reactions and sending their sympathies and their best wishes for Cody Rhodes. And they tried to cover it that way. But it just felt fucking odd to have that there. Like, oh my God, this is just a devastating attack. Like, it was... Like, the whole thing... I'm gonna say the whole thing kind of felt very 1980s again, and that kind of goes along to what we were talking about with the overall feel of the Cody Kevin Owens match, where it was a little bit like the old Saturday Night's Main Events, where you get a ref bump and another ref bump, and then you have the babyface champion kind of being a little heelish in picking up a win, and so it felt very 1980s. And then you see the post-fight breakdown, and it did kind of feel like a little old school as well, like Earthquake attacking Hulk Hogan after, and the crowd is in shocked silence as they go off the air, and what will happen to our fearless hero. But it would have been if you did that, and then you go, like, Mean Gene Okerlund is like, and we'll have the update for you on the 1-900 line. Call 1-900 blah, 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 to hear if Hulk Hogan will ever walk again. Like, it felt weird that they were touting their social media numbers and then brought it back to an on-cam with Wade Barrett and Joe Tessitore, and oh well, he has a bruised spinal thingy-bob. Like, it was just, I understand what they were doing. It was a good recap and all of that, but holy hell, did the social media thing in there feel strange to me. Anyway, we get a couple of announcements for January 6th on Monday Night Raw on Netflix. It'll be Roman Reigns against Solo Sikoa, and then CM Punk taking on Seth Rollins. Liv and Rhea, a pretty good promo segment. I don't think we got anything new or anything like that, but it does keep the intensity up, and it really does drive home. Don't focus anywhere else on anybody else. Rhea Ripley is your number one contender for the Women's World Championship, and it really puts the focus on this for, I think, one more run with these two. I would assume then Rhea gets a win and is the champion one more time going into WrestleMania season. Not much for Io Sky involvement on this show, and that kind of bummed me out a little bit, as you guys, I'm sure, are aware. We get Zoe Stark then against Raquel Rodriguez, already in the ring, and Kaden Carter in the Women's Intercontinental Championship tournament qualifying match. This match was a little all over the place. Zoe Stark gets the win. Crowd wasn't super into it, but this is one where Joe Tessitore, I thought, really shined, because he added a lot of excitement with his commentary, and I think that is a real skill to have as a play-by-play guy. When a match isn't the number one 5-star match, for him to be able to add that layer of excitement and add a layer of importance too is a fantastic skill, and Joe Tessitore has that in spades. But yeah, Zoe Stark getting a look, I think, is really interesting. And again, exactly what this tournament is supposed to be. She attacks Kairi Sane in the back after, with Kairi getting an arm injury or something along those lines, smashed into a crate of some sort. It seemed bad. So we will see what happens there. Main event, it was the War Raiders taking on the Judgment Day for the World Tag Team Championships. This was a solid match. The Priest involvement makes complete sense. Costs Finn Balor and JD McDonough. I thought it sets the table for that really well. It does really seem like Judgment Day is about to just explode here pretty soon. Finn Balor not looking like the best of leaders here with this particular group, and so that has not been the most effective use, I would say, of one Finn Balor. But I do think that, like, he is good in this role and is filling it perfectly. It feels like they're making him seem kind of dumb a lot of the time, and that's not awesome. But still, I think him against Priest in some kind of a blow-off match is going to be very big. And I love the War Raiders winning the tag team titles. They're a fantastic team. It's really well deserved. And I think now they're going to be able to let the focus be on the tag team titles, where the tag belts kind of felt like just something in the background with the Judgment Day thing. So I think it's good to get the belts away from Finn and JD and onto what I would say to be a bit more of a legitimate tag team. Overall, this was a fun show. A couple of the matches were really good. Nothing was overly offensively bad from this one. New Day not being allowed into the dressing room, which was kind of a show-long story arc. It was fine. It keeps it on people's mind while not really progressing anything, which is basically what they did last week. And so again, I suggest the difference. Sometimes there is a difference between long-term storytelling and just telling a story that's long. And it seems, so far, this is just a story that is long. But I do think it will pick up here very, very soon. And I guess it did set up the Rey Mysterio thing, but they weren't on the show. So why did they need to get, like, what? They were still looking for their dressing room with 8 minutes left in the show. Like, what were they doing? Why did they need to be there? Why did they need a dressing room? I think they could have gone like one step further with it and had like, well, the New Day, they were supposed to be in this thing, but they couldn't find anywhere to get dressed, so we had to put these guys in instead or something like that. Now, maybe that adds a little bit too much comedy to what we want to be a serious thing, but I think you kind of needed something to pay that off a little bit more than just, oh, they wanted a dressing room and couldn't find it. But it's fine because they're not wrestling tonight. That was the only thing that I thought was really weird. But aside from that, I thought a really good show that is building things up now toward January 6th and Monday Night Raw on Netflix. All right, that's the show. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Coming up tomorrow, NFL Power Rankings, plus a look at the quarterback situations across the NFL and more boxing talk. Follow me on social media at Primetime Klein. Check out Sea of Dead, seaofdead403.ca for some great Calgary merch. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Talk to you later. I am out.